over to you and allow you to talk to us and share some of your experience as a Christian and a teacher with us tonight and help us to move forward in our own journeys. Let's begin with a round of applause for this man.
Is it okay if I bring this down?
Yeah.
We like to go from the pedestal.
Well, it is an honor and good to be here. I told my wife had to work tonight, but I told her yesterday that it doesn't seem possible I've been in education for over 50 years because I'm only 29. So I'm just not sure how that works, but I have been in education I started out of college and just kept on going. And I figure the Lord's going to tell me when to quit. I just still enjoy teaching, so on I go. I thought I'd start with, I came to Christ my junior year of college. My faith started then, and it was through a roommate. That, do you remember when it used to be called Campus Crusade for Christ? Yeah. He was a crusader, and he said, my father's a pastor, but I wasn't, let's just say I was the normal pastor's kid who was, just did a lot of things I shouldn't do. And he knew that. And he said, Warren, you're just playing around. Either live the life you know you should live or just dump it. And he kept after me. He remember that little booklet? He must have shared that little booklet with me 3 or 4 times. He just didn't quit. And I'm thankful to say that I realized he was right, and that's when my faith started. So I was about 19, 20 when my faith started. And my journey into education, I fell in love. I was a math major. And it was the late 60s, interesting time to be alive. It's the late 60s, and I had my mentor who I had to go to get class schedules from. He said, Warren, you have to take a 7 o'clock class. Guy's on sabbatical, and he's only teaching one class at 7 o'clock. It was differential equations. And I said, I don't get up at 7. He said, I'm sorry, but that's the only time the class is offered. You have to get up at 7. I said, I'm changing majors. I was an idiot. I was a total idiot. And I changed to English, of all things. And as I went through English and I saw more red marks, I still remember I was supposed to write poetry, and I could not write poetry for the life of me. And eventually, I got in a biology class, and I grew to love biology. Oh my goodness, it was when DNA was being sequenced, and it was just unbelievable. And I fell in love with biology, and I went back to my mentor and told him I needed to change, and I've been in biology ever since. My degrees are all in biology. So I thought it's been 2 or 3 weeks now, I've been thinking about what, Lord, do you want me to share? And I've centered on my faith and my education in biology. I thought I would share that with you. It's just such an interesting time to be alive. I have a sign on my desk that says, Christianity used to be, people didn't believe it because they didn't think it was true. Now Christianity is rejected because it claims to be true. We're in a world where absolutes just aren't there. And I've come to believe absolutes are there. And how can I get that across to students and teach biology at the same time? So here we go. Last week, I don't know if you were here, Senator Kyle talked about science being, everybody looks at science as reason and religion as faith. And I'm one that tell you that my study of science has bolstered my faith. The National Academy of Sciences, I looked this up before I came. You want to make a guess as to how many biologists believe in God that belong to the National Academy of Sciences? Anybody have a guess? 5%. 5% of biologists say they have a faith in Christ. Now, the National Academy of Sciences is, you have to be invited in. It's not your normal association, but that still amazed me that 5% have a belief in Christ. I was at a biology convention. Everything now is pre-COVID or post-COVID. It was pre-COVID. And we were just sitting around the table on a small group, and they broke us up and they wanted us to talk about transgender issues. And I made the mistake of saying, I don't think it's the way we were designed. And I'll tell you, I thought, all hell had broken loose, to be honest. But they said, why do you believe in design? Why do you believe in God? And I had the opportunity to sit there and go through 3 major things that I'm just going to try and go through with you about my faith and how my biology has been affected by my faith and how my view of science has affected my faith. So you ready for some science? Here we go. Two major laws of science that point me to supernatural. I would really like to know if this makes sense. I've shared this with many people. I'm still looking for, is there more to this than I see? But first law of thermodynamics, law of conservation of matter and energy. What that basically means is it's conserved. The amount of matter you have, the amount of energy you have, that's all you have. You can't create it. You can't destroy it. You can change matter to energy. You can change energy to matter. But you can't annihilate it. You can't make it into nothing or bring it out of nothing. It's called the law of conservation of matter and energy. Now, I've sat and thought about that law for a long time. And I come up with 2 major possibilities. One is, if nature can't make nature, that's what conserving nature means. If nature can't make nature, something outside of nature had to make it. I don't have any trouble calling it supernature. I don't have any trouble calling it the supernatural. But that's one possibility. If nature can't make nature, something must outside of it make it. Secondly, it's just been here eternally. If I look out at this universe and all I see is everything, it's either been here eternally or something outside of nature had to make nature. Does that make sense? Second law, it's called the law of entropy. And that means the amount of usable energy in the universe is going downhill. Astronomers and physicists say this whole if this universe is just left to go, it's going to suffer heat death. It's going to all become about 4 degrees above absolute zero. It's going to stop, energy's going to stop being transferred one to the other, and it's just going to be the end of all things. Now, to me, that eliminates one of the first possibilities. Can you guess which one that is? I don't think the universe can be eternal because we'd already be at the bottom of the hill. We'd already be at the heat death. If it's eternal, we'd be at the bottom. And we're not there, which seems to me to point to the fact that if nature can't make nature and it can't be eternal, then something supernatural had to make it. And I tried in the best way I could go over that with those people around that table. And I think some of them, for the first time, thought maybe there is a reason to believe in the supernatural. I didn't have anybody accept Christ that day, but hopefully I had planted a little seed that my study of physics and chemistry has sort of pushed me in the direction of a faith in a supernatural God. Now, it doesn't bring me to Christ, but hopefully it brings me to supernatural. Second, when I look out over this universe, all I see is order. Everywhere I look, I see order. I get the privilege every summer of going to San Diego with my family for a week. We've been doing that for 10 years. It's just a great time to be together. And about my grandson, if you can believe this, he's a senior in college. And the first time we went, or it might have been the first or second year we went, we were walking down the beach. He was just a little kid. And he ran way ahead of us. And he was scribbling in the sand. And we got up there, and it was myself, my wife, and my daughter. And he'd written in the sand, "I love Mom." And it was it was just great to see. And my thought was, I asked him, I said, "Isn't it amazing how the water came up, receded, and left this message in the sand?" And he looks at me and goes, "You are nuts. I wrote that in the sand. That's a code." He didn't say that's a code, but he said, "I wrote that in the sand." And the most amazing code we have is inside us. My love studying biology is studying DNA. It's just the most amazing molecule. It codes for everything that we do. There isn't life without a code. And a code demands a coder. And a coder is something that's beyond what it's making. So, first thing is, I think the 2 laws of thermodynamics point vividly to the supernatural. I think just looking at nature points to an orderer. Every time I look at chemistry, I'm teaching chemistry this semester. We had a chemistry teacher. He died of COVID, actually. And so I had to take over his class. We couldn't get somebody, but every time I teach chemistry, you know that big table that's on the wall, the periodic table? Do you remember studying that thing? Oh, if that doesn't point to an orderer, I don't know what does. The periodic properties of all the elements, they're periodic. And that's the name of the periodic table, is there a repeating pattern in all the elements that we have found. All 92 of the elements that are natural, they follow a pattern. Physics has more laws than you can imagine. Mathematics is a beautiful orderer. So I can't look out at this universe without seeing the supernatural. Again, none of that stuff brings me to Christ, but it points me in a direction, which I try to share with these people sitting around that table, that I encourage you to just look around and see what's out there. Romans 1:20, I wrote that verse out for me so I wouldn't forget. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, being understood by what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Who he is seen through what he's made. And I marvel at his creation. It marvels to me that, do you know there's an enzyme that does one thing, walks up and down your DNA and looks for mistakes to correct them. That's just amazing to me. The order that we find, 25,000 genes I'm made up of, and they make everything about me. If I don't see an orderer, I think I'm not looking. And again, that verse says, if we clearly perceive, if we look, I believe we don't look hard enough. So anyway, that's my second major point, is when I see order. I brought a book. I'll get it. I put it up here. I have an 1895 biology book. I treasure it. You open up to, I think it's chapter 5. You open up to chapter 5, and it's the chapter on the cell. You know how many pages it is? 4 pages. It's got a picture in it. The picture says cell membrane, cytoplasm, nuclear membrane, nucleus, next chapter. I always show it to my Bio 181 class because I say, you would have liked to study the cell back in 1890. You would have really enjoyed the process. And then I bring out, this is the textbook on one thing. Can you read what that says?
Molecular biology of the cell.
The cell. This is the book now about the cell. We have this thing called the electron microscope that when it was discovered and they looked at the cell, they went, whoa, where did all that stuff come from? Light microscope just can't do it, but the cell is just the most amazing thing. I look at an airplane and think, thousands of non-flying parts all go together. That airplane sure looks to me like somebody designed it. And I look at the cell, I go, that makes an airplane look like kindergarten stuff. If we just look around, if we just perceive, I think our faith will be strengthened by leaps and bounds. Okay. Do any of you know Francis Collins? I followed Francis. He was the head of the NIH through the whole COVID thing. I followed him for 40 years. He loves the Lord. He wrote a book called The Language of God, which is all about DNA. If you want to read a good scientist about what he thinks about DNA and how, to him, it points to a creator. That book is a short book. It's not real long, but he puts it in language that we all can understand. He was a nuclear physicist who became a doctor. I can't imagine what his wife must have said. He went all the way through and got his PhD in nuclear physics and then went back and said, I really want to become a doctor. I'm sure she wasn't happy with that. You're going to go another 5 years to school? But anyway, that book, The Language of God, I recommend it highly to you. It is a good book to, I think, bolster your faith. Take science and make it, I think, the orderer understandable. Okay. Third point is I get in trouble sometimes when I share the third point, but I think the moral law that's within us is a pointer to God. It bolsters my faith. Romans 2:14 and 15, let me read that one to you. I have it here somewhere. For when Gentiles who do not have the law instinctively perform the requirements of the law, though not having the law, are a law to themselves, in that they show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience testifying and their thoughts alternately accusing or else defending them. I think there is an absolute. I think there is absolutes that we need to consider. This is probably the biggest point I get with students today. I had a student in my office last semester. And again, if you go to ACU, you are asked to write out your testimony. So everyone that walks through that door is supposed to know Christ. And we all know it's a process to get to walk with Christ. It's not just a one-time event. But this person came in and sat down and said, I don't believe in absolutes anymore. And I said, I do believe in absolutes. I believe there's a law within us that we know certain things are right and certain things are wrong. And I started changing his, I pulled up his grade and I started to change it.
Altered his grades.
I said, I'm just not real thrilled with what you're saying, so I'm going to take your chemistry grade and change it to an F. And he looked at me and said, you can't do that. I said, why can't I do that? And he said, you can't do that because that's wrong. And I said, you're not going to force your thoughts on me, are you? There is not an absolute. I can do what I want and you can do what you want. And I was trying to delicately get him to the point where he says, I think maybe there are some rights and some wrongs. He used the illustration of, before I went through this, we talked quite a bit. And the first thing he said was, you're a jelly bean person and I'm an ice cream flavor person. I had never heard that. He said, you're a jelly bean person and I'm an ice cream flavor person. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, a jar of jelly beans there's a right answer and a wrong answer for how many are in it. But if you say what's your favorite ice cream flavor, it can be different for different people. He said, it's okay if you think cheating's wrong. I don't think cheating's wrong. I'm an ice cream flavor person. And I'm going, I think we all know cheating's wrong. I think there are things that God has written in our hearts that we know to be right and know to be wrong. I wish I could say I asked you to think about these, and he left the next semester. And I was sad to see him go, but I hope he's pondering what we talked about. Let me read you. We have the Barna Research Institute on our campus now. I don't know if you know George Barna. He certainly knows his statistics. He is a researcher extraordinaire. And I just picked up, he's always sending stuff to us. But here was the last 2 surveys he did. First one says, in 2 national surveys conducted by Barna, one among adults and one among teenagers, people were asked if they believe that there are moral absolutes that are unchanging or that moral truth is relative to the circumstances. By a 3-to-1 margin, adults say truth is always relative to the person and their situation. The perspective was even more lopsided among teenagers, 83% of whom said moral truth depends on the circumstances, and only 6% of whom said moral truth is absolute. That's what I mean by Christianity today is rejected because it claims to be true. If it claims to be true, there's no absolutes. And that hurts my heart. Here was the second one. It was a survey he put out to preteen parents. Preteen parents. First of all, that's a tough road to go. And he separated them into if they check the box for being born again or non-born again. One of the questions was, determining moral truth is not up to each individual. There are moral absolutes that apply to everyone all the time. I was astounded by how many said, born again people said that was a true statement. There are moral absolutes. 30%. You know how many of non-born again said? 24%. 24% and 30% agreed with the statement that there are moral absolutes. That just hurts. Honestly, that just hurts my heart. And I thought, how do I move that needle? How do I move that needle? And I go back to my friend Bobby Wadoff, who brought me to Christ my junior year of college. He started a relationship with me and just kept asking questions. Kept asking questions. I don't think doubt is bad. What you do with that doubt, that makes a difference. But I don't think doubt is bad. I don't mind a kid coming in his educational world and saying, I'm having trouble. I'm not sure if this whole thing is true. I like that. I like having a question. We can have a conversation. You know one of my favorite Bible characters? John the Baptist. You know why he's one of my favorite Bible characters?
He asked Jesus if
he had some serious doubt. Of course, he was in a bad situation. He was probably about to lose his head. And he probably knew he was about to lose his head. And he calls his disciples and he sends them to Christ. And you know what question he asks?
Are you the one to come?
Are you the one, or should we look for another? John the Baptist says, are you the one, or should we look for another? Now, if I was Christ, I would have said, you idiot. You baptized me. You saw the dove. You heard the voice. What is wrong with you? Get with it. That's what I would have said. He turns to the crowd. You know what he says about John the Baptist? There is no one greater. The guy had just said, are you the one, or should we look for another? And he says there's no one greater than John the Baptist. He said, tell him the lame walk, the blind see. He gives them an answer. But before he gives them the answer, he turns to the crowd and said, there's no one greater than John the Baptist, who just asked this amazing question of Christ. Now, what did John the Baptist do with his doubt? He took it to Christ. He wanted an answer. He didn't just sit there and stew. And when I have had doubts in my life, to be honest, I've had doubts in my life. When my daughter's had 2 major surgeries. In her second major surgery, it didn't go as well as we hoped. And she had some complications. And I still remember I could come to church, but I couldn't sing. I could just stand there and weep. Is all I could do. And I wasn't sure about many things, but there's one thing I was sure about, and that was there was a God, and he did care for me. I couldn't figure life out. And I doubted. But I took it to God. And over a period of 6 months, he helped me work through it. But I'll tell you what, when life gets tough, to me, that's when I start doubting. And that's when I need the help from other people. That's when I called Bobby Wadoff. I just needed someone to talk to. So I think in the educational process, it's okay to have doubts. Let's just get them answered. That's my encouragement to you, is just get them answered. What time is it? 6:40. Oh my goodness. I said there'd be time for questions. Well, they tell us all this in education. Don't quit before you at least review what you talked about. Don't quit until you at least review what you talked about. Number 1, 2 laws of thermodynamics. To me, they point to the supernatural. Okay? They don't bring me to Christ, but they point to something more than this universe that I see. The order that I see. Number 2, the order is everywhere. It's everywhere. God says in Romans 1:20, just perceive what's going on. And I think if we'll think about it, we have to come up with an orderer or a creator. And the third major thing is we have a law written within us that, boy, we're living in a world that's denying it. But let's for sure tell young people that God does care and that he does have a law that we need to follow. If we walk away with those 3 things, I'll feel good tonight. I'll feel good tonight. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. That gives us an opportunity, because we did stop a few minutes to go to ask some questions. And those can be, science and theology questions, or they can be biology and faith questions. I know, many of us are looking also at, as citizens, at how, given the sort of numbers you gave us on how few people kind of share a lot of the fundamental Christian principles around moral absolutes and the importance of faith to the human enterprise, how little of that is shared. I think how to be Christians in a secular society, particularly when it comes to like public education. I think that's
my heroes, I went the route, I should say this, when I taught in public school for 5 or 6 years, and the last year I taught in public school, the principal came to me, he said, I know you're religious, but I'd like you to put on the Christmas program, but don't use the word Christ or sing any Christmas carols. And I went, okay, I'll do what you ask. But God started using that in my life to bring me to walk into Christian education. Many of my heroes are teachers in public schools. We graduate, about half the people go to private school and half the people go to public school at our school in the education department. And those people are doing an amazing work for God. They are. We have kids that come back, and biology students who are educators who come back, and they're doing stuff with Young Life. They are finding ways to get to their students, and I just think it's just the neatest thing in the world. So I don't want you to think the public arena is needed just like private schools are needed.
Anyone have questions they want to raise? Lisa.
So just kind of an obvious one that comes to mind for me, which is, so I'm a student and I'm interested in biology, and how do you jive the creation with biology and Darwinism?
Well, we do have people at school that are what I call young earth. Now, I'm not a young earth. I'm not a young earth person who thinks, I think God created life. And I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you, all of the creation process. I don't think it was 6,000 years ago. I don't think that. Yeah. But to me, he created with plasticity. The genetic code can change, okay, over time. And how old the earth is, now that I'm not sure of. But I think I look at science as the Bible was written to tell me how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. That's a quote from Galileo. I think it takes a lot of hard scientific work to figure out geology, to figure out astronomy, to figure out it takes hard work. But I come down on this side of God created the earth. I think he created the code for life. How much plasticity he put in it, I'm not sure. But we have good discussions. I think the best part about college is you have opposing views, and you can sit there and come to your own conclusion. The guy he's a medical doctor, the guy who heads up the Young Earth Creation Society, he's a medical doctor. And we have some good discussions. We don't always agree We always agree that Christ created. How plastic he made that creation, that's another question.
Good questions. Anyone else got a question they want to raise tonight?
I have it's like an urban myth question. I always heard this. And when you think of the Big Bang or something like that, I heard somebody once talking about that and said when they figured out the Big Bang Theory that they didn't release it for a while because they felt it proved God in a way. Did that make sense? Is that something?
Well, the Big Bang is the creation had a start.
Mm-hmm.
And up to that point, there's what's called the steady state theory. And the steady state theory is that it's just been eternal. And hydrogen is created somewhere in the universe and keeps pumping in new matter. And that one has sort of fell into disrepute.
Right.
But I think it took a while for that one because it does need a creation event.
So it's two things, right? It's the fact that, why is there anything at all? That question is raised by the Big Bang Theory. It undermines the idea of the eternity of the universe that you talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. And then it's also the specificity of the particular moment of the Big Bang. So this is described by physicists like John Lennox, the famous Oxford physicist. So I could give you several other books on this, but the moment of creation has to be so mathematically specific that within a very, very, very tiny space of time, if the numbers don't match exactly, there's no possibility for life emerging. This was very disturbing to many scientists that wanted to disbelieve.
There's 10 to 15 physical constants that if those are off by a little bit, life isn't possible. Like the gravitational constant. If it's just a little bit less, matter doesn't coalesce. If it's a little more, it just crunches.
Right.
It's just on a knife edge. And there's so many, Planck's constant, the Coulomb's constant, they're all at a knife edge, pointing to the fact that there's an order to this universe that is amazing.
And in physics, that's actually called the anthropic principle. That idea is called the anthropic principle, that human life has these extremely specific requirements. It's not like this happened 100 million times, and then this happened once. The singularity of the event that required all those constants is a very, very suggestive.
There's a philosophical
reality.
Argument I like too, that like if you imagine a timeline from eternity past to eternity future, it can't be eternal in the past because you can't get to today. It had to have a start because you can't go backwards eternally and get to today, which is a philosophical argument. It's not.
It is, but that, in physics, one of the cool things now, we just sent a second great probe out, that goes farther than Hubble, has these dramatic photographs. That's actually looking, because the universe is expanding, that's looking back in time. Right? So again, this reinforces the biblical idea that all of life is a story that has a beginning, that's initiated. And it all has a sort of, there is a dramatic story-like context to all of life. I mean, that is the story of physics. Physics tells right now. Amazing.
I'm no physicist, but every physicist I've talked with says there's a beginning to this universe.
Yeah.
And it's not just eternal. And it requires something more than nature, which is amazing to me.
Any other questions before we wrap up, and then we can talk individually?
Student views on absolutes. Have you noticed any trends in student views over the decades of teaching and how things have shifted in any particular area?
Well, I've certainly noticed in the past 5 years a trend to yeah, whatever. Whatever. I told my wife the other day, when in high school, I took Latin, 4 years of Latin, and I had to start the day with Latin. And Mr. Delgado, who he let us know he didn't believe in God, but he had to read the Bible and pray every morning in public school. That was required of him, and that was public school. And I have certainly seen a change in the standards for that. The thing I love about ACU is I get to pray before every class if I feel like it, if I want to. And I try and do it every day, just ask anything I can pray for. But again, my heroes, or some of my best heroes, are public school teachers. I think they're doing an amazing work. And they need our prayers. They need our prayers. I have seen the absolute go the way of the dodo bird.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one thing to say, I don't believe in moral absolutes. It's another thing to try to live as if you don't. And that's a far more difficult thing. It's the student that really didn't want the teacher to abandon the moral absolute of honesty and integrity when it came to their grades.
Yeah.
For those of us who aren't in the public school system, who don't have children in the public school system, who really may have grandchildren, but they're back east somewhere and we don't have a lot of day-to-day contact with them, what can we as Christian citizens of this state do, if you have a recommendation, to help increase the idea that there is a truth out there, that, 2 + 2 is 4 unless you're missing 2 fingers and you're in base 8. I mean, how can we help promote or reverse what's been happening in the last 5 to 10 years?
Well, that's a big one right there.
I wish I had a good answer for you. I do believe, I've come to believe I don't pray enough. I don't seek the Lord's face on half the things I need to do that. My daughter, who has 2 second grader and she goes and talks to the principal. And the principal of both schools is a believer. And they're certainly trying to teach absolutes, that honesty is important, that truth is important. I think there are many people out there that are doing that. It's just the trend of society is away from it. But there's many people that in the public school that are, I think if you talk to the principal and talk to the teacher, I'm sure it's not true of everyone, but you'll find many that are trying to teach the truth.
I think in Arizona, I'll just add to that, ACU and GCU are interesting phenomena. It's one thing for there to be pockets of small Christian colleges around the country that can look like they're, part of the belief system of an era that's passing away. It's another thing when you have the largest Christian college in the country that could, their president told me they could double in size if they had the resources. They have so many applicants. That, in fact, there is a hunger for a form of education that does orient people in a more secure and powerful way, give them more of a sense of purpose and what we're doing here in this universe. And I think that the growth of GCU is one example of that.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Let's pray for this great man. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the calling we have to be teachers, and we thank you for teachers who kept at it for 50 years, who discovered a passion for the way in which biology works in all its mystery and its incredible levels of order, and we just marvel at nature's fecundity and its power to reproduce, and yet at the same time we look at the amazing ways in which its very properties raise questions about the one who started these processes, established these laws, and who still is at work within the realms of both biology and history, bringing his purposes out. And so we ask your blessing on Dr. Pettit tonight, and we ask, thank you for the gift of his time and his insight. And all God's people said,
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.